All right, so this is Michael Slobodnik, AI Solution Architect for Commercial Central, and I am going to walk you through from beginning to end the setup of a ServiceNow MCP server, and not only that, how to connect the oAuth security for authentication, and we're also going to go over using an application called LM Studio, which you can see here that runs local AI models, but also will allow you to connect to an MCP server. And this is a great tool to be able to demonstrate the connection to an MCP server. That's a very quick and easy way to demo. Now, the one thing I will tell you about LM Studio is that yes, they make a Windows version, which is what I'm running here, but they also do make an Apple version, and I've tested it and it works on Apple. The one thing I will tell you is make sure you've got one of the newer Apple computers, an M4 or M5, and at least 24 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to cover that here in a little bit, but until then, we're going to go ahead and start setting everything up in our environment. So here we have my wonderful handy dandy demo instance that we're going to be using for our MCP setup. So first thing I'm going to do is go to my MCP Server Console. And here, I've already got some MCP servers set up, even one for LM Studio Server, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new server from scratch so we can go ahead and check this out. So with this new server, I've got to give it some kind of label, what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it LM Studio, and we'll say demo, have it a little bit different than the other one. Um, MCP server for LM Studio demo on local Windows or Macintosh computer. And the other thing that we need to go ahead and do is add some tools to this MCP server. So we're going to add in some of our tools here. I have one tool that I created or a skill that I created that will analyze an incident with a failed SLA. Maybe we'll do a get incident details. And I think there was one other one. Look up incident records. In fact, we'll even do incident summarization. So we're going to add 4 different tools to this MCP server, and we'll go ahead and create it. Now, let's open this back up in the machine identity console here. The machine identity console, this is where we're setting up the oAuth credentials to actually do the authentication. But before we get into this, one thing I need to address is that in our MCP server here, it's going to give a URL. If you copy that and paste it into another browser, you should see something like this: error authorization header not found. If by chance you are working on this, and if I bring up a different instance, so this is a different environment, but it has MCP servers. If you'll notice here, let me copy a URL from one of these and paste it, and you're going to see the page we're looking for could not be found. If you run into this error, this means that there needs to be some additional network routing that the support team has to update for your instance. So when you're setting this up, and if this comes up here when you try to connect the MCP URL, you've got to stop what you're doing, go to the support, enter in a case for your instance, be specific to say there needs to be network routing for an MCP server and that you got this error message, and it takes them maybe a day or two. I think they do have to reboot the server or something, the instance as well. So you run into this error, you're not going to get very far. But continuing on, if we know that we've got our instance set up and working, or at least the initial connection working that we had shown, and we're ready to set up with our authentication, we're going to go ahead and say, let's just create a new integration. And in this case, we're going to do an oAuth authorization code grant. And we'll call this the LM Studio Demo oAuth and LM Studio Demo oAuth. And it is going to give you a redirect URL that you're going to need in order to do the authentication for this piece. Hmm. The redirect URL means that when you first go to authorize the credential, it's going to redirect back to your URL, back to the system that you're getting the credential through. In this case, because LM Studio runs on your local machine, it uses the IP address of 127.0.0.1. Now, you can set the port number of what you're going to use for your server, and then it has another routing of MCP oAuth callback. So this is information on the LM Studio website, but I got it for you, so you'll be able to get this right away and not have to dig around for it. There's going to be two pieces of information you're going to need: the client ID and the client secret. So part of some of the information we'll need is the MCP information that we're going to put into LM Studio. So I can tell you that from this notepad of information we're going to put in, here's where we're going to do the client ID. We'll copy this client secret, which we'll use here under the client secret. And then this URL is going to be that same URL that we already created. I'll save this first and then I'll get it. And the other thing we need to do is under auth scope, since this is a demo environment, we're going to use something called user account, which basically gives access to just about everything. Normally, if it's production, you'd be very specific of what you're going to give access to. Now, the last piece you really need to do here is under the advanced options. Expand this, and under token format, set that to JWT. So we're going to save this on the oAuth. And if we go back to our server, we'll copy our URL. And in our setup file that the LM server is going to use, it's going to use this as the URL. And we can give this name. This is just the name that it's going to see in LM Studio. Nothing too crazy here. We'll get to this in a minute. So on the ServiceNow side, we went through and we set up our LM Studio MCP server. We were specific with what tools were going to be added. We set up the oAuth. That oAuth, we had to go ahead and copy out the client ID and the client secret. And then we also copied out made sure we set the token to JWT. So for all intents and purposes, we're done on the ServiceNow side. Now we need to go to LM Studio here. Now, LM Studio is a pretty fun application because in this, you can find models that you want to download, including ServiceNow models that we have through Hugging Face. Now, depending upon the resources of your computer, because once again, running AI and LLMs are pretty intensive, I recommend this Gamma 4 12B QAT. I've tested this one in my Mac already, and it works fine. My PC I'm running here is pretty powerful, 64 gigs of RAM and a 5070 titanium with 12 gigabytes of video RAM, so I can pretty much run anything. But on the Macintosh that you may be using, you want to go a little smaller. Now, before we get into anything else, we've got to do a few settings here. So when I installed this with developer options. And so if I go to my developer and go to my server settings, first thing you'll notice the server port needs to be 33389 to match what we had for the callback. And then we need to make sure we enable certain things like our require authentication so we can serve this on the local network. We want to allow things to call MCP JSON, and we want to enable CORS. CORS is the allowing cross-origin resource sharing. So basically everything here under those server settings. The last thing comes into mcp.json. So we've seen something like this before, right? Haha, here we go. So that text that we modified here with the name, a URL, client ID, client secret, this is where we put this into LM Studio. And we should see that it has been successfully added. Great. Now that we've got our server set up, we got our MCP set up, we're going to turn our server on. If you get something around here of your firewall, allow it, because it's acting as a server. It needs, the network access. Now from here, we can go to our chat, essentially. But before we do anything else, on our upper right here, we want to show the sidebar. And we want to go through and load a model. So once we load our model, it's loading here. So we're now getting a model to work. That's fantastic. So now we've got AI running. You may hear your power fan kick on if you're running Windows. And now we can do a new chat. And in that sidebar to the right, when I do a new chat, you'll notice that there's a configuration for different things about the models. I'm not going to worry about that. But there's the integrations. And when we get to the integrations, we should have our MCP that we had set up. And we're going to flip this on. Now, we flip this on. It's going to initialize. And it's got to get to our trust and open our browser. So this is where oAuth is coming in, and we're allowing the application to authenticate. So we should see something right here where if you're already authenticated to your instance, it's going to come up and say, yes, allow. And we get to authentication successful. Now, when we get to authentication successful, we're in pretty great shape here. We've got our, it took the model off, so let me reload this. I think we're good. It's got our tools. You'll see the tools list that we have available. And to the right, it says ask before running or always allow. So now we can ask it and say, tell me about all open incidents with priority 1 or priority 2. If we've got the model running correctly, it's actually going to go through and essentially think through what you're asking. And then with the MCP server, these tools basically have descriptions to them. And then it starts to identify to say, great, I think I need to look up a incident records tool here for my MCP server that's connected. Now, the great thing about this is that I am running this local, so I'm not dependent on Claude or anything. Here it is asking me if I want to proceed. Yes, I can proceed. And then we can always allow, proceed. And so I can just say allow all, always allow, always allow. And here we are. It's giving me my list. And then I can continue and say something like this. Give me details about. So this is a pretty powerful tool. Like I said, it is a little bit intensive in terms of running using resources, but if you want to really be able to show kind of a quick and easy way to connect an MCP server, oAuth works obviously, pretty easy to go through and authenticate. You do have to spend a few minutes just to set up LM Studio with the correct port and everything, but this was from refresh install. So I was able to set up an MCP server, get it connected to LM Studio, and within a matter of 10 to 15 minutes. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this very useful.